What's going on? This Theo Gremminger from Player Profiler, and we're talking about Week 3 fantasy football sleepers. And this is not your run-of-the-mill sleeper show where I'm going to talk about guys that were drafted in like the 8th round of your league. We're going to talk about players. Every single one of them is available in at least 75% of Yahoo leagues. These are deep sleepers for the most part. But in today's day and age, with all the injuries, all the problems teams are having right now, some of these guys are going to have to enter into your starting lineup. We're not out here throwing darts. We want to make calculated decisions, and we want to find players that we can put into our lineup when we're in a jam. Sometimes these guys are not the most fun starts, but we can paint a picture, and some of these players can deliver on that promise. And excited to announce to some of the YouTube viewers who watch this every single week that this is going to drop as a podcast as well. The show's done well on YouTube. People seem to really enjoy the sleeper advice. So look for it on the Player Profiler Podcast Network. Look for it on its own feed as well. It's going to be called Undercover Ops. Looking to find you those players you can beat your league mates to the waiver wire on, or they can get you through on the week. This week, I've got like 15 plus names. We're going deep because I want to find a number of players that you can stash, even if you don't need to use them. So for some of you that are in good shape, just use this video as a, hey, Saturday, I'm going to grab one or the two of these guys. I'm going to add them to my team. And then maybe if they pop, I don't have to use any fab. Maybe I get a player that I could trade next week. And for some of you, this is like, I'm in desperate shape. I need a guy that can plug in the lineup. Maybe I lost George Kittle this week. Maybe I lost Deebo Samuel. Maybe, all the countless names out there. It's tough times in these streets, but we're going to do what we can to win. It's a weekly game, so put your DFS mindset to the work and go ahead and win the week and just get by. Those injured players, for the most part, they'll be back soon, so you need to survive. Can't go like 0-3 without your main dude. You need to be able to say, oh, you know what? I went 2-1 in that stretch. Now I'm getting back like an A.J. Brown. So let's do it. Let's talk about some of these sleepers. And you can find my article over at playerprofiler.com where I'm going to talk about all of these guys. So podcast, YouTube, and article. Let's start out at the quarterback position, and let's start out talking about Sam Darnold. So Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield are sort of the talk of fantasy football, where these guys are playing so well. The Saints and the Bucs are playing so well. The Clint Kubiak offense, unbelievable. The Liam Cohen offense, unbelievable. But very quietly, the Minnesota Vikings are also 2-0 this year, and they beat the San Francisco 49ers last week. And this was a really huge win for Sam Darnold, maybe the biggest win of his entire career. But Sam Darnold is really benefiting from his current situation. He's getting very strong offensive line play. There's very strong play calling, and having that Justin Jefferson guy doesn't hurt. Like, Jefferson is unbelievable. The long touchdown, unbelievable. But what was really impressive was Justin Jefferson exited the game with a quad injury. Now, we anticipate Jefferson's going to play this week, but he exited the game with a quad injury, and you're like, here we go. San Francisco's going to come back. But Darnold made a number of really big conversions and a bunch of huge plays. They have Houston coming into town this week. Like, if you have Sam Darnold on a Superflex roster, he's a must start for the entire season. But this is a game where it could actually tilt up because Houston has a passing game that could put pressure on Minnesota. So this is a really interesting one. But Sam Darnold, like, if you had Matt Stafford as your QB2, you had a Justin Herbert as your QB2, maybe you drafted a Trevor Lawrence, a Tua Tagovailoa, then Sam Darnold is like a life raft for you. He's still available in 73% of Yahoo leagues, and Derek Carr and Baker Mayfield are off the wire. So Sam Darnold, scoop him up before this weekend. If they go 3-0, he's going to be talked about this week. Got to talk about my guy, Justin Fields. Justin Fields has done absolutely nothing fantasy-wise, but he had 14 rush attempts in week 1. George Pickens looks awesome. George Pickens has very strong early usage. And Justin Fields has done one thing extremely well. He's gotten through 2 road games with 2 wins. Now the Chargers come into town. Pittsburgh's home opener. And this is a game where you might see them open up a little bit more. Chargers are a little bit more difficult opponent than certainly what we saw with Denver last week. So this is a game where Justin Fields at home. You might see him rip off a big run. You might see him connect with George Pickens on a downfield pass that maybe goes for a touchdown. It feels like a big play is coming. They did what they had to do to win in Denver last week, and they got out of town. I want to roster Justin Fields and see where this goes. I refuse to believe that this is going to be like a Justin Fields doesn't do anything type offense, and they just use him as like a game manager. We've seen him have too many spike weeks for us in fantasy, and if they go to 3-0, then it's going to be difficult for them to move back to Russell Wilson. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about tight ends, wide receivers, and running backs.
This episode is brought to you by Player Profiler, the Dynasty Deluxe package. The rankings are the best in the industry. It includes strategy mode where you can say, hey, change the rankings to be win now. Oh, change the rankings to be productive struggle. There's also a draft planner to help strategize where you should take players because the draft planner also includes ADP. There's a trade finder where we look up on My Fantasy League and we see trades that are done, including a particular player. Then there's a trade analyzer where you can plug in draft picks, players, and we assign a lifetime value to draft picks out 5 years. The best thing about our trade analyzer, it can't be gamed with volume. And there's mock draft data to see right now what's the market for player X versus player Y, including in the fall when very few mock drafts are happening. And our Dynasty guide, the Dynasty Dominator, would cost you $10 on Amazon, but you get it for free with Dynasty Deluxe, and you get our rookie guide for free, a $25 value. So you get all of that for $45. I mean, it's a great deal.
Welcome back. We're talking about sleepers. We're talking about stashes. And you can get this video now as a podcast, Undercover Ops, right on the Player Profiler feed, or if you want to subscribe to it on its own, Undercover Ops. So maybe get tired of watching my videos. Maybe you just want to listen to it. We're going to get you in and out. This is going to be a quick one. Let's talk about the tight end position. Let's talk about Colby Parkinson. This is a player that I was very enthusiastic about after week one. Had a strong week one, and then sort of fell flat on his face last week. That was a absolute buzzsaw. The Cardinals gave the Rams a complete beatdown. I think the Rams have an opportunity to regroup this week. Obviously, the whole talk of fantasy is which wide receivers for the Rams are you going to add to your fantasy roster? Obviously, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp both out. They have offensive line issues. For me, I think Parkinson can bounce back. He's had a snap share above 82% in both games. And actually his route participation, the number of routes he ran based on the number of plays they ran collectively as a team, was actually higher in week 2 than it was in week 1. Everything just sort of fell apart. But with multiple wide receiver and offensive line injuries, I think that getting a few extra targets to Parkinson makes some sense. He got that big that big contract, and we saw it in week 1, what he was capable of. Colby Parkinson is available in 70% of Yahoo formats. I traded for him in a Dynasty League this week, just thinking we might see a little bit of a bounce back. Talking about Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith finished as tight end 6 last week. Tight end has sort of been a dumpster fire, but Jonnu Smith finishes as tight end 6 overall last week, and he played very well. 6 catches on 7 targets. Had a couple people asking me about Jonnu this week, mentioning that he looked pretty good, and I agree. Jonnu this week with Skylar Thompson behind center. Skylar Thompson has a reputation of being sort of a check down artist, and a lot of the talk there is from my guy, Devon Achane. Obviously, Achane is going to benefit, but getting Jonnu Smith involved, letting him manufacture some runs with his yak ability, that makes some sense this week. So if you're looking for a dart throw tight end, maybe you lost, or George Kittle looks like he's not going to play. Maybe you lost Kittle. Maybe David Njoku was the tight end you drafted. Go think about using Jonnu. And then the last tight end we're going to talk about, Zach Ertz. Boring. I know, like, Theo, what are you talking about? I do not want to add Zach Ertz. But last week, Zach Ertz had 4 catches. He had 62 receiving yards. The Washington Commanders get the win. And Zach Ertz is just dominating usage. So Ben Sinnott, for whatever reason, they're not using Ben Sinnott like I anticipated they would when they drafted him in the 2nd round. So Zach Ertz this week, this is a tough one for Washington. The Bengals are 0-2. It's a Monday Night Football game, and you've got the chance here for the Bengals to get like a get right performance. Right now, Washington obviously is a team that gets shredded by opposing wide receivers. They've allowed 3 top 24 performances, and that Jamar Chase guy is due for a big game. Washington's also allowed 2 top 12 quarterback performances. Joe Burrow also due for a big game. So this is one where Washington's going to have to play keep up, and the game flow might dictate that they might have to pass a little bit more. They've been utilizing the running backs. Brian Robinson off to a nice start. Jaden Daniels, obviously, nice start fantasy-wise, but he might have to pass a little bit more just to kind of keep up. So I think Ertz could be a beneficiary of the game flow. Also, I think he's sort of a floor play if you hate the other tight ends on your roster. Let's flip it over to the running back spot. Probably the number one sleeper. And I anticipate that by the time you get to like Sunday morning, he's going to be readily scooped up everywhere because the news will just start trickling out. Joe Mixon, doubtful. Dameon Pierce already out. Didn't play last week, dealing with a hamstring injury. You've got Cam Akers. You've already seen J.K. Dobbins have this incredible bounce back season. Now you might see it with Cam Akers this week. Had 7 carries last week, caught a pass, and Cam Akers looked very good in the preseason at times. A lot of it was against second, third string defenders, but we've seen Cam Akers perform well on an NFL field. And Cam Akers is a guy that was obviously a second-round pick years and years ago out of Florida State, has dealt with all sorts of injuries. And this could be like a goodwill, feel-good story this week to see him in a really good offense, have a really good performance. A lot like we have all this like positivity with J.K. Dobbins, that could be there with Cam Akers. So at the time I wrote the article, he was available in 83% of Yahoo leagues. I figure by the time we wake up on Saturday morning, Cam Akers would have been rostered like 30%. And if Joe Mixon is announced out sometime Saturday, then Cam Akers is going to be like 50% rostered. So as soon as you hear this podcast or as soon as you watch the YouTube video or read my article, grab Cam Akers. Just pause, go grab Cam Akers. You can always come back and watch this. But Cam Akers, I think this will be like a running back 2 performance for Akers. The one reason I'm not like over the moon is I think it could be annoying with Dari Ogunbowale getting a couple extra targets. He's sort of a company guy that the coaching staff knows. Do they put a ton of pressure on Akers and have him be this like 3-down bell cow, or do they work in a pass catcher? Any way you cut it, though, this is an offense that gets a ton of production out of the running backs. We saw it last year with Devin Singletary. We saw it early on with Joe Mixon. Bobby Slowick is a future NFL head coach. He gets it. He gets production out of running backs. He'll even get production out of Cam Akers. Probably the best player that I'm mentioning on this video is Cam Akers. Go and get him if he's available in your league. Let's talk about a stash. Let's talk about a couple of these wide running backs that are stashes. It's a tough week to pick up running backs and put them into your lineup. But let's talk about Jaleel McLaughlin. This is one where I'm looking at the results in week 2, and I'm looking at Jaleel McLaughlin, and I'm saying I don't quite understand the shift in usage between Javonte and Jaleel in week 2. And I know there's always a lot of Javonte enthusiasts out there whenever I say anything negative about him, but let's face the facts. Javonte Williams had his career low yards per carry last year, and he's averaging 2.1 yards per carry right now. Denver is in dire straits offensively. Denver just lost at home to Pittsburgh, and they couldn't get out of their own way. So I think this takes a little bit of self-scouting, where I look at Denver and I say, how can we take a little bit of pressure off of Bo Nix and the struggles he's having as a quarterback? And I think you need to get Jaleel McLaughlin back to where he was in week 1. And you also have the fact that Tampa Bay has allowed 3 top 24 running back performances. So this could be a game where if Denver does what I think they're going to do, you're going to see a little bit more Jaleel McLaughlin in his stats are going to look a little bit more like week 1's than they were in week 2. And I think this is one you just put him on your bench and you see what happens. And it's not going to cost you much of anything. You're grabbing as a free agent. You grab him as a low waiver wire bid. But Javonte, like, how long can they keep doing this? Jaleel is a very good pass catcher. This is a scheme that rewards pass catching by the running backs. And what was Bo Nix good at last year at Oregon? Check downs, low A-dot looks. That can be something Jaleel McLaughlin can contribute. And if you want to avoid this completely and you're like, I don't want anything to do with Denver, I don't blame you. but it's very rough out there looking for running back sleepers this week when we use this sort of roster percentage. And we'll talk about Jalen Wright. Raheem Mostert is going to miss again. Jalen Wright is available in 85% of leagues. A lot of sort of frustrated managers out there right now expected Jalen Wright to have his breakout performance in week 2. It was completely Devon Achane. Devon Achane is playing fantastic, dominated touches. Devon Achane had 29 touches last week. Devon Achane has 14 receptions in 2 games. But when we look at Jalen Wright, it's a contingent upside play. He's become a guy that people were aggressively drafting in the preseason, drafting him very highly. I was in leagues where Jalen Wright was drafted in the 10th round. And you already have one injury to Raheem Mostert. Mostert's a guy who's missed tons of time in his NFL career. Now, like recency bias, Mostert's been really healthy in Miami for 2 years. But if you go back and look at how he was earlier in his career, he played like half the year. So Jalen Wright, with his explosiveness, this is a player where if Devon Achane missed time, they'd have to use Jalen Wright. And I wonder if they don't become a little bit more running back centric with Skylar Thompson behind center. This is one where just stash him, put him on your bench, see what happens this week. But maybe this was like a hiccup type game. And I refuse to believe that the Miami coaching staff can't get something out of a player as athletic and as explosive as Jalen Wright. I know there's issues with the vision, but this is a dude who can really, really go. So let's see what happens. And we'll talk about, this is my deep cut, deep sleeper. So Travis Homer is now going to miss this week. Roschon Johnson is not playing at all. And we talk about self-scouting. Caleb Williams is struggling. Caleb Williams had a really, really poor performance last week, and the Bears did him no favors. The Houston Texans got to him all game long. He ends up throwing 2 interceptions, gets sacked right and left. And I look at Khalil Herbert, and this is one where this is just like galaxy braining, but I think he's worth stashing on your roster because I have a feeling that to take the pressure off of Caleb, they're going to work in a little bit more of the run game. Herbert scored the short rushing touchdown against Houston. Herbert, again, has like no productivity this year at all, but he is an effective runner. We've seen him have strong games. And Chicago plays a Colts defense that just conceded 261 rushing yards. Josh Jacobs had over 150 rushing yards, and he had more rushing yards in the first half than we've seen a Green Bay Packer running back have since 2001. So Herbert is obviously not Josh Jacobs, but if I'm looking to protect Caleb Williams, I'm going to see if I can't get that run game going a little bit. That the defense for Chicago is playing way too well for the offense to sort of keep letting them down. Tennessee game, the Chicago Bears defense puts them on their back, wins. Then last week, they held Houston to 19 points. You hold Houston to 19 points, you've got to be able to win that game. Chicago didn't. So this is more of just a me looking at Chicago and saying, maybe this is the way that things shake out. So this is, again, a $0 bid, a free pickup. Stick him on your bench, see what happens. Maybe you see a little bit more Khalil Herbert. And if he does nothing, just cut him when you get to the waiver wires. Now let's talk about wide receivers. And this is an exciting one. We have a number of really exciting options this week. More guys that you can use in the flex than we usually do, and a couple to stash. But the way things are shaking out for a lot of fantasy managers, you're going to end up using some of these guys. I know I am. And the one that I'm the most excited about is Juwan Jennings. And Juwan Jennings, we were already excited about him when Deebo Samuel was announced out. Jennings got the contract this offseason. He was already like being pretty productive this year in his wide receiver 3 role with Brandon Ayuk slow out the gate. But Jennings is a player we've seen have strong performances. He has familiarity with Brock Purdy, familiarity with the system. The 49ers gave him the contract this offseason. So Juwan Jennings is like a like for like in terms of route participation, in terms of snap share for Deebo. Obviously, completely different player than Deebo, but he is the next man in. Now you factor in the George Kittle potentially missing this Sunday as well, and Juwan Jennings could see like a really outsized role. I think he's a locked-in wide receiver 3 this week, and for me, on a couple of lineups, I'm going to be using Juwan Jennings. I'm going to temper my expectations. We're not going nuts here. He's not going to give you a Deebo performance, but he's a guy that can help you get through the week. Like we talked about, DFS mindset. Get through the week with a win, get through the week with a win, get through the week with a win. Juwan Jennings can help you do that this week. I like him this week. Let's talk about Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen is available in 76% of Yahoo formats. And this is one where Thielen played so well last year, was really, really strong to start the season. And one of his strongest games last year was with Andy Dalton behind center. So Andy Dalton returns to a starting position. Bryce Young, really one of the worst draft picks we've seen in recent times, especially when you consider how much they had to give up in order to get him, and the fact that they passed up on CJ Stroud to get him. And really, they passed up on Anthony Richardson as well. Richardson would have looked really good in the Carolina uniform. So Andy Dalton returns to quarterback, restarts the game, and we look at what Andy Dalton did last year, his one game. He had 14 targets to Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen caught 11 of those for 145 yards and a touchdown. So the prevailing notion for all fantasy managers, and the one that I'm sort of hoping for, is Andy Dalton can unlock Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson was a guy that people were confidently drafting, whether it was best ball, whether it was redraft, saw some steam, was like a 6th round redraft pick, was a player that a lot of like quote unquote sharp money was on this summer. It's been a disastrous pick, and we're blaming Bryce Young for that. But what if there's a scenario where Andy Dalton takes over and he prefers targeting Adam Thielen? I don't know. Maybe it could be a 50-50 split and they both get targets. Any way you cut it, this Carolina Panthers offense is going to look far different than it did under Bryce Young, and the wide receivers are trending up here. So we like picking up Adam Thielen as a speculative play. And if you're in a real bind and you want to throw somebody in the flex, you already have the chemistry between the two of them. Let's see if lightning can strike twice. Let's talk about Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert, this is probably more of a stash. And this is one where people are going to say, yo, Theo, like, I don't know if you saw the game, bro, but Dallas got killed by the New Orleans Saints, and Tolbert benefited only because it was a blowout. I get that. But at the end of the day, I don't think the Dallas Cowboys fully know their offensive scheme. In terms of, scheme's not the right word, in terms of their target allocation, in terms of their weekly touch expectation. Brandon Cooks, it was sort of assumed, is going to run away with the wide receiver 2 job. I know I talked about him in my week 2 waiver wire video. I do this for waivers as well, about how Brandon Cook's going to be a beneficiary for the weeks that Jake Ferguson misses. Jake Ferguson's coming back here. But the interesting thing with Tolbert is 9 targets, 6 catches, career high, like 82 yards. And Baltimore has actually given up 3 top 24 wide receiver performances on the season. Now, obviously, it was Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, and Devontae Adams. Little different caliber player than Tolbert. But Tolbert seems to have some chemistry with Dak Prescott. This is more of a stash. Grab Tolbert, see if we don't see 2 strong games in a row out of him, and maybe he has sort of a late year 3 sort of semi-breakout this year. Just a stash. I wouldn't start him. Jennings I could start. Thielen, if I'm in a bind, I could start. But I'm going to stash Jalen Tolbert. And then let's talk about my guy, Josh Downs, coming back. Josh Downs, the player that I've talked about in a lot of my waiver wire columns, my waiver wire videos, and waiver wire podcast. Downs, the guy that I really, really like as a player. Set the Colts rookie record for receptions last year at 68 receptions. That's more than any player in the history of the Indianapolis franchise has had. Was really impressive during OTAs, really impressive in the preseason, and now he's returning. Now, this is a weird situation where the downfield targets to Alec Pierce have been strong. Adonai Mitchell's had some good separation, not really any production. Michael Pittman's production has gone way down. Michael Pittman, like dating back to last year through these first 2 games, some troubling signs for a guy that you drafted this early. I think Pittman is a big regression candidate based on his stats and finish from last year. So we say, where does Downs fit in? Where are we going to find these targets for Downs? And I say, this is a player where he's just going to make things easier on Anthony Richardson, make things easier on this entire offense. You're finally going to see a more complete offense with Indianapolis. They just had a very, very poor game. Green Bay completely took the air out of the football, and ran Indianapolis off the field. Really, really poor outing for this offense. I think we're going to see a little bit more usage out of Downs than some people are projecting. It's a real of a betting on the talent and betting on the fit. Downs is a guy that can win in the slot. He's really their only true slot receiver. Obviously, Gardner Minshew was a player that sort of elevated Downs, but Downs and Richardson have some sort of a chemistry here. These are two guys that were drafted together. All sorts of reports that these guys get along, that these guys enjoy working with one another. And I buy into that when it comes to some of these younger quarterbacks, wide receiver combinations. So Downs was a player that they drafted right after they drafted Richardson, meaning that they view him as a player that can help Anthony Richardson. I think that this is a opportunity to grab Downs and see where this thing is headed. Again, it's going to be a cheap one for you to grab. He's available in 76% of Yahoo formats. And if I'm wrong, you can send him back to the waiver wire in 2 weeks. If I'm right, you might end up with a player who's seeing just as many targets as Michael Pittman, and he actually helps this offense, and this offense takes a step forward. Downs is a really good addition for Indianapolis to get, especially coming off of a loss. Let's talk about the LA situation. We got to do it. You're watching this video. You're in a competitive league. Demarcus Robinson is rostered in your league. We talked about him last week in the Sleepers video. Robinson has a steady role right now. Is he a capped upside guy? Sure. But Robinson's going to see some end zone looks. He's going to be on the field a lot. Really, the conversation turns to Tyler Johnson, Jordan Whittington. We talked about this last week. Now we're going to talk about it with these two players with no Kupp and no Puka Nacua, and we have offensive line injuries. Tyler Johnson, we've seen it. 5 catches, 79 yards, broke off that really nice long catch and run in week 1. So Johnson, we've seen it. And San Francisco has given up 4 touchdown catches to wide receivers this season. That's pretty significant. They had the 2 to Lazard, then they had 1 to Jalen Nailor, and 1 the 97-yarder by Justin Jefferson last week. So 4 touchdowns to wide receivers in 2 games. Johnson is probably the one, if you need to throw somebody in the lineup this week, would be the one I would bet on. But the other player who I have in my column and also on this video that I want to talk about, Jordan Whittington. The longer Puka Nacua is out, the longer Kupp is out, the more it becomes apparent that they might have to use Whittington a little bit more than they anticipated. If you guys are some of the sickos out there like myself that enjoy watching NFL preseason football sometimes, it's still fun. What else are we going to watch? It's football. Jordan Whittington balled out. And Jordan Whittington was a guy that Sean McVay had effusive praise for when the media asked him about him. Talked about Jordan Whittington. The Rams are one of the best teams in football when it comes to giving us high-end fantasy football production out of day 3 draft picks. Kyron Williams, day 3 draft pick. Puka Nacua, day 3 draft pick. Now, Jordan Whittington, also a day 3 draft pick. Dealt with some injuries at Texas, played with Xavier Worthy, played with Adonai Mitchell, played with Jonathan Brooks, Jatavian Sanders on that mob that Texas had last year that made the college football playoffs. But Jordan Whittington's a guy who lands in LA and they like him. He can win in the slot. He can win with Yak. He can also be put in motion like we see with Puka Nacua last year and with Cooper Kupp in the McVay offense. You're putting a wide receiver in motion. Whittington can do a lot of that stuff. So Whittington, the longer they struggle and the longer those other guys are out, the more appealing Whittington will be for us as fantasy managers, where if they can't get it going with Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, Tutu Atwell, you're going to see more and more Whittington. Whittington is the one where if you want to stash somebody for a long-term outlook, go with Whittington. And the last wide receiver I want to talk about, I'm actually going to have to use him in a lineup that's dealing with multiple injuries, is Jalen Nailor. And Jalen Nailor played 94% of the snaps in week 2's win over San Francisco. 94% of the snaps is wild. That means he's on the field nearly the entire time. He had 3 catches, and he had a touchdown catch, a very important one against the 49ers defense. Nailor was one where if Justin Jefferson, if that quad injury would have been something more substantial, then we would have upped our expectations for Nailor. But I still think that he has an opportunity to be the second most targeted Minnesota Viking this week. And we talked about Houston. If Houston puts the pressure on Minnesota, then Minnesota might need to play a little bit more aggressive offensively. So for me, I like Jalen Nailor, and he's available in 92% of Yahoo leagues. So again, these players all available, every single player I talked about, available in at least 70% of Yahoo leagues. Really appreciate you watching this video. Subscribe to the Player Profiler Podcast Network. We're going to call this Undercover Ops. Undercover Ops is the podcast version of this. Keep watching on YouTube. Really appreciate the support. And let's crush it this weekend. Injuries are not an excuse. Let's get it. Make calculated decisions. Get yourself through. And those players who are injured, most of them are going to be back. And you're going to have some of these guys might pop on your bench. You might have a stronger lineup because of it. It's about the end. It's about winning the playoffs, not just having all your guys available to you this week. So stay tough. These injuries are tough. I'm Theo Gremminger. If you like this video, hit the like button. We'll see you back here next week.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.